Ladies and gentlemen, Fred P. Hochberg.
I'm going to be very brief because one, I know a few people would like to catch a flight, and we have our national security advisor who is here, and there are a lot more pressing things in the world, so I want to make sure that we don't create any crisis in the result. Let me just give you one little more information about EXIM, which leads into our speaker. We took a look at our authorizations, and last year, 70%, a full 70% of the work we did, the financing, insurance we did, is in the developing world. And in fact, it only reminds me, the first time I had dinner with Susan Rice, and I said, we're not a development agency, we're an export agency. She says, you're actually a development agency. So you're right, and I was wrong. 70% of what we do is in the developing world, and 7 out of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. And so this summer, President Obama convened an African Leaders Conference. We brought in ministers from Africa, business leaders, government officials. It was a 2-day event this summer. And at the close of that, the president singled out one exporter who he felt represented the best of American entrepreneurship and the African export market. So let's just see what he had to say.
Kusum Kavia was born in Kenya. Her family was originally from India. Eventually, she emigrated to the United States, and along with her husband, started a small business in California. It started off as a small engineering firm. Then it started manufacturing small power generators. With the help of Export-Import Bank, including seminars and a line of credit and risk insurance, they started exporting power generators to West Africa. So Kusum is here. I had a chance to meet her backstage. She's, where is she? Right there. Stand up, Kusum. So she's doing great work. Thank you so much. But she's an example of what's possible. So let's follow Kusum's lead.
So how many people get to be introduced by the President of the United States? So that's something we all aspire to, and I only know one woman who has that, and let me bring you Kusum Kavia to the stage.
Thank you so much, Chairman Hochberg. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here this afternoon and to welcome you all to this year's keynote speech. That was an amazing moment that was made possible last year through the help of the U.S. Export-Import Bank. My name is Kusum Kavia, and my entrepreneurial journey began in 1989 when my husband Mukund and I decided to start our business, Combustion Associates, Inc., in Corona, California. Today, we are an engineering and manufacturing company that specializes in power generation systems and EPC work. With the help of the Export-Import Bank, we have been able to grow our business, create jobs, and support global projects. In fact, today we have also brought our customers, Louis and Ngozi Adojian of GigaGas Nigeria, to be first-time attendees to the U.S. Export-Import Bank annual conference. We are completing an 80-megawatt. We have recently completed an 80-megawatt gas turbine power generation system. It's a power plant project in West Africa, along with other power plants in the sub-Saharan Africa and Central America region. Africa is very, very important to our strategy. It is important because we know that growth lies there. And most importantly, both my husband and I were born in Africa. Again, it's an honor for me to introduce this year's esteemed keynote speaker, White House National Security Advisor, Susan Rice. Ambassador Rice previously served for the U.S. To the United Nations and was a member of President Obama's cabinet. Her experience in foreign policy allows her to bring a global perspective to our discussions about U.S. exporting, and I'm just so thrilled and excited to have this opportunity to please help me join in welcoming Ambassador Susan Rice.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you, and obviously I want to begin by thanking Kusum. I can't replicate the wonderful introduction of President Obama, but I can thank you for being kind enough to introduce me. Your story, Kusum, is truly a powerful testament to the drive and ingenuity of American small business owners and to how the Export-Import Bank facilitates connections and commerce that lift up our world. And I want to thank my friend Fred Hochberg, not only for his invitation today, but for his outstanding leadership of EXIM. Fred, you've held the reins through a challenging time, and throughout it all, EXIM has provided critical support to help get the global economy back on track, and indeed to help spur global development. So thank you very much. President Obama has made promoting prosperity his top domestic priority and a key pillar of our national security strategy. Even as we're dealing with pressing global challenges, from countering terrorist threats to preventing the spread of nuclear weapons, to combating climate change, we're advancing an affirmative agenda that promotes prosperity around the world. Of course, President Obama is by no means the first American leader to emphasize the connection between a strong economy and a strong foreign policy. During the Depression, President Roosevelt proclaimed that America's, quote, full and permanent domestic recovery depends in part on a revived and strengthened international trade. And after World War II, President Truman noted that, quote, peace, freedom, and world trade are inseparable. So today, once again confronted with a changing world, I'd like to lay out how the Obama administration draws on America's economic strength to bolster our national security and prepare for the challenges of the future. First, we're expanding economic opportunity, starting with American workers. We're now in the midst of the longest streak of private sector job growth on record. Businesses have added more than 12 million new jobs. We've brought unemployment from a high of 10% in 2009 to 5.5% today. And critically, wages are finally on the rise again. FDR was right that America's recovery is linked to robust international commerce. That's why President Obama launched the National Export Initiative in 2010 to help American companies reach overseas markets and create new jobs. And it's working. Since 2009, exports have made up almost 1/3 of our growth. All told, exports support more than 11 million American jobs, and those jobs pay up to 18% more than non-export related jobs. We're also encouraging foreign direct investment into the United States. Business leaders already recognize that the United States is the best place to locate, invest, and hire. So we're making it easier for them. With our Select USA initiative, we've cut red tape, streamlined government processes, and helped generate more than $20 billion in job-creating investments. That's good progress, but there are more markets waiting to be tapped. And that's why the Export-Import Bank of the United States is so essential. Last year, financing from the bank helped thousands of American entrepreneurs reach new markets and grow their small businesses. It supported 164,000 private sector American jobs, and it didn't cost the American taxpayer 1 cent, not one. In fact, Ex-Im returned $675 million to the American Treasury. Now, that's the very definition of win-win. And I can tell you, when President Obama meets with foreign leaders, Ex-Im is a very important part of our diplomacy. So I join the President, members of Congress from both parties, the American Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, and small business owners across the country in calling on Congress to reauthorize the Ex-Im Bank with a long-term mandate to continue its vital work. Today we're pursuing the most ambitious trade agenda in history. We're working with Congress to secure support for a critical piece of legislation. You may have heard a little bit about it this week. The Bipartisan Congressional Trade Priorities and Accountability Act. This bill will help us finalize the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and ultimately to create a free trade zone that encompasses 2/3 of the global economy, with the United States at its very center. With this legislation, Congress doesn't cede any power to have the final word on trade agreements. Rather, it sets the parameters for a deal up front, a deal that protects the interests of American workers, sets high environmental standards, protects intellectual property, and includes robust enforcement provisions. In short, it gives us the leverage to bring home the best possible agreements. And that brings me to a second way we promote prosperity. Increased trade and investment is good for the global economy, but to realize its full potential, everyone has to play by the same rules. By 2030, 2/3 of the world's middle class, more than 3 billion people, will live and work and buy in Asia. To sustain America's growth, we need to be part of those markets. So we're working hard to finalize the Trans-Pacific Partnership and break down trade barriers across the dynamic Asia-Pacific region. At the same time, through TPP, we'll ensure that American businesses can compete on a level playing field. We'll protect access to shared spaces like the internet, the seas, and the sky, so that goods, people, and ideas can move more freely across the region. And we will raise the bar on global trade, enshrining the high standards and enforceable protections that Americans expect. Our economic relationship with Europe is already the largest in the world. We conduct $1 trillion in annual two-way trade, invest $4 trillion in each other's economies, and support jobs for millions of American and European workers. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership will boost all of those numbers. And if we align the rules that govern commerce on both sides of the Atlantic, we will effectively set the standard for commerce around the world. These agreements will secure real economic benefits for the American middle class and advance American global leadership. Our security and our ability to shape global events are closely tied to our sustained economic strength. But the global economy is not going to wait for us. So the choice is not between moving forward with these agreements or maintaining the status quo. The choice is between leading the world in a direction that supports American values and interests, thus enhancing the safety of American citizens, or being left behind. These trade agreements are an integral part of our vision for a future where all countries follow the same rules of the road and all countries benefit. A future where growing prosperity supports our shared security. At a time of shifting power in Asia, TPP reaffirms America's commitment to the region and to the alliances that have underwritten security and growing prosperity throughout the Asia-Pacific for decades. As Asia continues to grow and drive the global economy, our strategic interests in the region will become even more important. Preserving peace and preventing maritime or territorial disputes, but also strengthening the rule of law, advancing human rights, and promoting inclusive development. We're committed to shaping the development of this region that will only grow more important in the future. Meanwhile, TTIP will strengthen our transatlantic bonds and put us in an even stronger position to take on shared challenges with our closest allies. We seek to build an economic relationship to match the scope and further strengthen our security partnership with Europe. Let me be clear. Growing the global economy is not a zero-sum contest between established and emerging powers. If we work together to grow the whole pie, we will all be better off. That's why President Obama elevated the G20 to be the premier forum for global economic cooperation, to make sure the world's fastest-growing economies were also part of the world's most important economic discussions. And that's why we will encourage new institutions, like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, to uphold the standards that underpin sustainable, inclusive economic growth. We're also committed to modernizing the established institutions of global finance, like the International Monetary Fund. In the 1980s, the IMF coordinated the response to an international debt crisis brought on by oil shocks. In the 90s, it helped former Soviet bloc countries transform themselves into market-driven economies. Today, the IMF is a first responder to global crises, helping Ukraine stand up against Russian aggression, securing our allies in the Middle East against extremists, providing economic relief to countries fighting Ebola in West Africa. Proposed quota and governance reforms for the IMF would better integrate rising powers like China, India, Indonesia, and Brazil, while preserving American leadership and our veto power. Congress should pass IMF reform so that we can join our G20 partners to strengthen this bulwark of economic security. Third, we're expanding prosperity by promoting inclusive growth. Developing economies provide new markets, growing middle classes, and customers that are essential to sustaining American economic strength. So under President Obama, we're forming partnerships that help countries lift themselves up. And we're harnessing the resources and the expertise of the private sector to amplify our efforts. So take, for instance, the New Alliance for Food Security. Thanks to more than $10 billion in private sector commitments, we're strengthening agriculture and helping farmers across Africa raise their incomes. Or take Power Africa, with $7 billion from the U.S. government, including support from Exim. We've brought in more than $20 billion from the private sector, all focused on increasing access to electricity for 60 million households and businesses across Africa. American firms, as Kusum will attest, are eager to expand into African markets. And African countries want to do more business with the United States. And that's why the African Growth and Opportunity Act and our Doing Business in Africa campaign are such effective tools for spurring broad-based development. The African Growth and Opportunity Act, known as AGOA, makes it easier for African businesses to sell their goods in the United States. That helps grow Africa's middle class, who in turn buy high-quality American products. Under AGOA, both Africa's non-oil exports to the United States and American exports to Africa have more than tripled. So President Obama strongly supports the bipartisan legislation introduced last week in the House and the Senate to update and renew AGOA for the next 10 years. With more than half the world's population under the age of 30, we're investing in job training, entrepreneurship, and educational opportunities for young people. Through our Young Leaders initiatives in Africa, Southeast Asia, and most recently in the Americas, we're empowering the next generation with skills and the experience to help them succeed. With the President's Spark Global Entrepreneurship Initiative, we'll generate more than $1 billion to help young people launch and expand new enterprises. And this summer, President Obama will participate in the 2015 Global Entrepreneurship Summit in Kenya. By spurring trade, setting 21st century standards, and building the capacity of our partners, we strengthen our ability to take on global challenges, like climate change. The United States is leading the charge to achieve a strong international climate agreement this December in Paris. We've set an ambitious climate target for ourselves and announced joint actions with other major emitters, including China, India, and Mexico. At the same time, we're developing clean energy solutions that will fuel our continued economic growth, working with partners to set emissions targets that will mitigate the worst effects of climate change, and helping vulnerable countries improve their resilience to climate change. Our economic tools also defend America's national security interests. Consider, for example, our engagement with Iran. With our P5+1 partners, we've successfully reached an initial framework agreement for a long-term deal to prevent Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. But that deal would not have even been in the realm of the possible had it not been for strong, rigorous, enforced sanctions that brought Iran to the negotiating table. When we employ sanctions, we target those who flout international norms while minimizing the impact to the broader global economy. We rely on sanctions and other financial tools to cut off terrorist financing and disrupt transnational criminal organizations. Coordinated sanctions with our European partners are imposing costs on Russia for its aggression against Ukraine. And as online commerce continues to grow, we're developing dynamic approaches to enhancing cybersecurity, including a recently issued executive order authorizing sanctions to deter the worst cyber actors. This brings me to my final point. We rely on the private sector to advance America's values and economic leadership. As a government, we are open to accessing foreign markets. We protect our sea lanes and our skyways. Since 2010, our commercial advocacy has helped American firms to sign contracts totaling more than $200 billion in new exports. At the same time, America's businesses are the foundation of our economic strength, upon which so much of our security and prosperity depend. So both the government and the private sector have responsibilities to fulfill. For example, corruption costs the global economy about $2.6 trillion each year. So we've made anti-corruption efforts a centerpiece of our foreign assistance strategy. If countries want development compacts from the Millennium Challenge Corporation, they must embrace good governance. Through the Open Government Partnership, we're working with more than 65 nations to improve economic transparency. And the Department of Justice has been dogged in prosecuting those who pay or seek bribes in international commerce. We also count on American companies to meet the highest standards of responsible business practices. We hold an advantage in the global marketplace because our companies are known as accountable, transparent partners. So we're developing, in partnership with industry, a national action plan to promote responsible business conduct and to ensure that the American brand in business reflects American values. Leading in the 21st century isn't just about the might of our military. It's about using every element of American power, including our economic power, to promote universal values and expand opportunity for all people. It means using diplomacy to rally partners to meet global challenges. It means implementing development policies that don't just put a Band-Aid on poverty, they help eradicate it. And it means fostering a vibrant domestic economy and policies that expand our shared prosperity. When President Obama spoke at this conference 5 years ago, he issued a call to, quote, make this century another American century. As a nation, we've come a long way since then. It's taken hard work and characteristic American grit to climb out of a deep hole, and we're not done yet. But with our resurgent economy, our unmatched network of partners and allies, and our firm commitment to expand prosperity, we will continue to pursue a future of shared prosperity that benefits all people. We will ensure that America continues to lead the global economy throughout this century, just as we did in the last. Thank you all very much.